So, when you break your arm, the x-ray just shows a jagged white line, right?
Right.
The doctor points at the film, says, there it is. It's a clean break. It's a really simple diagnosis.
Yeah, easy to see.
But when you step into the economics of extreme poverty, that whole x-ray machine just shatters.
It completely breaks down.
Exactly. And today we're taking a deep dive into this economic paradox that is just hiding in plain sight in rural Kenya.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation.
We're looking at a population of, honestly, the hardest working, poorest people on Earth who are intentionally making the worst possible financial trades, like year after year.
Right. They are caught in what we can really only describe as a survival paradox.
A survival paradox. Okay, explain that.
Well, to understand how this works, we're diving into this landmark piece of research from a team at Stanford, UC Berkeley, and UChicago. It's Marshall Burke, Falcao Bergquist, and Edward Miguel. The paper is titled Sell Low and Buy High.
Sell low and buy high, which is, that title alone should make anyone with a basic understanding of markets just freeze in their tracks.
It completely violates the golden rule of finance.
Right. You're supposed to buy low and sell high. That's like day one stuff.
Exactly. But in these rural Kenyan grain markets, specifically for a staple crop like maize, the data proves these farmers are doing the exact opposite.
It's wild.
And we are not talking about, some subtle market inefficiency. We're talking about a massive, highly predictable seasonal price fluctuation.
Okay, so how big of a fluctuation are we actually talking about here?
The scale is staggering. By the standards of any developed economy. The researchers tracked major local markets, and the pattern is brutally consistent.
Okay.
In the 6 to 8 months directly following the autumn harvest, the price of maize predictably skyrockets.
Skyrockets like what, 10%?
No, we are looking at regular price increases of 25 to 40%.
Wow. Wait, 40%?
Yeah. And in some of the more isolated rural areas, the price regularly jumps over 50%.
That is insane.
It is. And in certain follow-up years during the study, they actually recorded price spikes of 80% or even 125%.
Okay, I just want to frame that for you, the listener, so the sheer magnitude really sinks in. Imagine you have just a standard savings account, right?
Right.
But this account guarantees a 40% return in just 6 months.
Which doesn't exist anywhere else.
No, it's not a speculative tech stock. It is not some crypto gamble. It is a near certainty dictated by the literal physical changing of the seasons.
Exactly. The profit margin is sitting right there, clear as day.
In classical economics, this is a massive arbitrage opportunity. You'd be crazy not to take it.
Precisely. It's intertemporal arbitrage. You hold an asset when the market is flooded and the price is at the absolute floor.
Right.
And then you sell that asset when the market is dry and the price hits the ceiling. Any rational economic actor should be capitalizing on this.
But the observation on the ground contradicts that entirely.
Completely, entirely.
The farmers, they literally dump their grain at rock-bottom prices right after the harvest in September and October. They sell low.
Yeah, they sell at the absolute bottom.
Then months later, during the lean season, which is right before the next harvest, they return to those exact same local markets.
But now they return as consumers.
Exactly. And they buy that exact same grain back at the absolute peak price. They buy high.
It is the ultimate anti-common sense behavior.
It really is. So why? What is the assumption here?
Well, for decades, the assumption from outsiders, policymakers, even major developmental organizations was based on this deficit mindset.
Meaning they just assumed the farmers didn't know better.
Exactly. The assumption was they simply lacked financial literacy. Or, even more commonly, people assumed the farmers just lacked the physical technology to store the grain.
Ah, like it would rot.
Right. They thought it would rot, or be eaten by pests, or succumb to mold.
Okay, that's the classic if they only had better silos
Yeah.
argument, right? We see so much charitable funding poured into agricultural tech based on that exact assumption.
We really do. Millions of dollars.
But this research completely shatters that myth. The baseline data they collected on storage costs is just wild.
It fundamentally changes the diagnostic picture. Because storing grain in these regions is not prohibitively expensive. It's not technologically complex.
So what do they actually do?
The farmers have a well-established, highly effective local system. They dry the maize kernels thoroughly on a tarp in the sun.
Okay.
They treat the crop with a really cheap, widely available insecticide dust to prevent weevils and other pests.
Right.
Then they store the maize in locally manufactured sacks, keeping them elevated on simple wooden pallets inside their own homes or in small outbuildings.
And the numbers prove this system works, right? I mean, the researchers calculated the total cost of these materials.
Yeah, they tallied up the tarps, the dust, the sacks.
And it amounts to a microscopic 3.5% of the total value of the crop.
Just 3.5%. But the real question is spoilage, right?
Yeah.
Even if the sacks are cheap, what if half the grain rots? So the researchers meticulously tracked post-harvest losses over a 6 to 9 month storage period.
And what was it?
The average spoilage rate was a mere 2.5%.
Wow. So we have a 3.5% material cost plus a 2.5% spoilage loss.
Right.
The total cost and risk of storing this grain safely for the better part of a year is roughly 6%.
Yes.
Meanwhile, the guaranteed seasonal price jump is 40 to 50%.
It's a mathematical no-brainer.
You are literally paying a 6% fee to unlock a 40% gain. To put this in perspective, I was thinking about this earlier. Imagine taking your heavy winter coat to a thrift store in July and selling it for $10.
Okay.
But you know for an absolute fact that you will freeze to death in December unless you return to that same store and buy that exact same coat back for $50.
That's a brutal analogy.
But it's accurate, right? Why would any human being do that year after year unless there was an invisible gun to their head?
That is the crucial question. When you observe human behavior that looks like intentional financial self-harm, especially among populations operating on razor-thin survival margins, you have to look past the surface.
You have to find the gun.
You have to hunt for the invisible constraints. And in this case, the invisible gun to the head is not a lack of barns.
Right.
And it's certainly not a lack of intelligence. It is a brutal, unyielding calendar of debt and expenses.
Okay, let's talk about the household bills. What we can call the January guillotine.
The January guillotine, I like that.
Because the researchers didn't just look at market prices, right? They went into these villages and ran extensive focus groups.
Yes, they did qualitative research alongside the hard numbers.
They asked the farmers directly, like, why are you selling your crop for pennies in October? And the farmers didn't talk about rats or mold. They talked about cash flow.
Cash flow is everything. The harvest happens in September or October, but the Kenyan school year operates on the standard calendar year.
Meaning January.
It's exactly. This means the largest, most inflexible chunk of school fees is due in January. And school fees in rural Kenya are not a trivial expense.
No, they're huge.
They represent a massive percentage of a household's annual income.
And it's not just the school fees, right? It's the accumulated debts from merely surviving the previous year's lean season.
Oh, absolutely. They owe the local shopkeeper for cooking oil and soap. They owe their neighbors. They have medical expenses.
Right. The moment that crop comes out of the ground, they are hit by a tsunami of financial obligations.
This creates a severe liquidity crunch. The farmers are incredibly wealthy in terms of caloric assets. I mean, they have a house full of food.
But zero cash.
They have absolutely zero cash. And because rural farmers are systematically excluded from the formal financial sector, they have no modern tools to manage this mismatch.
And the baseline data from the study on this is chilling. Only 8% of these farmers had access to any kind of formal bank loan in the previous year.
Just 8%.
So without a bank, their only option is to use their actual food as currency. They are forced to treat the local maize market like a high-interest loan shark. They liquidate their crops in October to get cash today, fully aware that they are locking in a massive financial penalty when they have to buy food back in May.
It's devastating.
I want to highlight a statistic from the source material that completely rewired my brain on this topic. Before the researchers intervened, 35% of the farmers in this study both sold and bought maize in the exact same crop year.
Let's really let that sink in. More than 1 in 3 farmers takes their hard-earned harvest, sells it at the lowest possible price, and then months later takes whatever cash they can scrape together to buy the exact same crop back for nearly double the price.
It's tragic.
It is the functional equivalent of taking out a payday loan with an astronomically high interest rate, just to bridge the 3-month gap between the harvest and the school tuition deadline.
See, we in the developed world usually think of a market as a place of opportunity, right?
A place to grow your wealth.
A place to sell your surplus to get ahead. But for these farmers, the market is a predatory ATM.
A predatory ATM. That's exactly what it is.
It is a mechanism that systematically extracts wealth from them simply because their biological harvesting schedule is misaligned with their social cash needs.
And traditional banking is completely failing to bridge this gap. I mean, even if a formal bank did exist in the village, traditional interest rates in Kenya can run 18 to 20% annually.
Wow. But wait, mathematically, taking a 20% loan to holding an asset that appreciates by 50% is still a highly profitable trade.
It is. But these farmers don't have formal land titles to use as collateral. And the administrative cost for a traditional bank to underwrite, a $50 loan to a remote farmer is simply too high.
So the root cause is just a timing mismatch. The crops are harvested in October, the cash is needed in January, the food is needed in May.
That's the entire puzzle.
So the researchers hypothesized, what happens if you surgically inject a tiny bit of credit at the exact right second? This brings us to the intervention. The researchers partnered with a highly respected microfinance NGO called One Acre Fund to design a very specific experiment.
They designed a financial product called a harvest time loan. Now, from a traditional agricultural lending perspective, this is a very strange product.
Exactly. Why does giving a loan to a farmer right after harvest seem so backward to a banker?
Because usually, agricultural microcredit is distributed at planting time. You give the farmer a loan in March to buy hybrid seeds and fertilizer so they can grow the crop.
Right, to create the asset.
Exactly. If you walk into a farming village in October, right after the harvest, the farmers look richer than they will at any other point in the year. They are literally surrounded by bags of food.
So offering cash to someone standing next to a mountain of maize seems entirely counterintuitive.
It makes no sense to a traditional lender.
But this loan wasn't designed to help them grow the food. It was designed to help them protect it. It acted as a financial shield against the market. Let's trace the exact mechanics of this experiment because the methodology here is just brilliant. They didn't just drive a truck into a village and hand out cash.
No, it was highly structured.
They worked across 17 different regional clusters. The paper calls them sublocations. They partnered with 240 existing One Acre Fund farmer groups.
And the key mechanism was that the loan amount was strictly tied to how many bags of grain the farmer safely locked away in their own home storage.
Okay, this is a critical detail. The NGO did not build a giant centralized silo and take physical possession of the grain.
Right, which is what a lot of co-ops do.
Because centralized storage creates immense trust issues, high transport costs, and risks of massive centralized theft or spoilage.
Exactly. Instead, the grain stayed right where it was, in the farmer's own home. One Acre Fund field officers simply visited the home, verified the stored bags, and tagged them with a laminated serialized tag secured with a zip tie.
And the focus group feedback regarding those simple laminated tags is fascinating to me. When the researchers first proposed this, the farmers practically cheered for the zip ties.
They loved them.
They wanted the official tags on their grain. It wasn't just administrative tracking, it provided a massive psychological defense mechanism against what economists call the kin tax.
Ah, the kin tax. This is an incredibly powerful social force in tight-knit rural communities.
Explain the kin tax.
Basically, if you have a large pile of grain sitting in your living room and your neighbor's child is sick or your brother needs cash to fix his roof, the social pressure to give away or sell that grain to help your extended network is overwhelming.
It is a system of forced solidarity.
Exactly. You can't just say no to your family when you clearly have the resources right there in your house.
But those tags changed the dynamic entirely. The farmers realized that if the bags had an official-looking tag from One Acre Fund, a well-known, strict lender, they could point to the bag and say, "I would love to help you, brother, but I literally can't touch that grain. It belongs to the NGO. It's official collateral."
It's brilliant. The plastic zip tie provided a socially acceptable excuse to protect their own assets from their community.
It armed them against their own social obligations. So, with the grain secured, the loan was dispersed. The amounts were relatively small but highly targeted, about 4,800 to 6,600 Kenyan shillings.
Which, at the time of the study, translated to roughly 57 to 79 US dollars.
Okay. And the interest rate?
The interest rate was a flat, transparent 10%, and full repayment wasn't due until 9 months later, well past the lean season.
Okay, so you inject $70 into a rural household in October. What actually happens? Because this brings us to our first massive reversal in the narrative.
Right.
The results were immediate, and frankly, they looked like a miracle.
The data showed a profound and instant shift in market behavior. For the farmers who were offered this harvest time loan, their inventories shot up.
By how much?
They held an average of 25% more grain in their homes than the control group did.
So the panic selling stopped dead in its tracks.
Completely.
Yeah.
In the crucial months immediately following the harvest, the net revenues for the loan group were actually negative compared to the control group.
Wait, negative? Why is that good?
because it means they weren't just holding their own grain. Many of them were actually taking the loan cash and buying more maize while the price was at rock bottom.
Oh, wow. They leaned all the way in.
Exactly. Then, the trend completely inverted later in the year. During the lean season, when prices hit their zenith, the loan group's net revenues spiked massively.
They finally executed the textbook strategy. The moment they had the cash to pay the January school fees, they stopped being victims of the market and became arbitrageurs.
They bought low and they sold high.
It's amazing.
And this specific outcome resolves a massive debate in developmental economics. Are people in extreme poverty making bad choices due to behavioral biases, lack of education, or present bias?
Right, the whole "they just don't know any better" argument.
This study proves that these Kenyan farmers are highly sophisticated, profoundly rational economic actors. The absolute second you remove the artificial credit constraint, the second you take that invisible gun away from their heads, they instantly and flawlessly execute the optimal trading strategy.
Let's talk about the actual profits, because the ROI is staggering. The researchers calculated the total effect on net revenues across the year, and importantly, they calculated this net of the 10% loan interest the farmers had to pay back.
Yes, after paying off the loan.
The average profit increase was about 1,548 Kenyan shillings, which is roughly $18.
Now, to a listener in a Western country, an $18 profit over 9 months might sound trivial, but you have to scale it against the size of the initial loan.
Right.
That $18 profit on an average loan of $65 represents a massive 28% return on investment.
The 28% ROI. Hedge fund managers in New York or London would literally commit crimes to secure a guaranteed 28% ROI in 9 months.
They really would.
And these farmers achieved it simply by sitting on the food they had already grown.
From a traditional microfinance evaluation standpoint, this is an astronomical success. Most randomized controlled trials of traditional microcredit, like where you give someone a loan to start a small business, they show almost zero average impact on household profits.
Billy, zero impact.
Yeah, because starting a new business is risky and requires entrepreneurial skill. But this intervention required zero new skills. It just required waiting. Because the risk was so low, the profit jump was incredibly robust and statistically significant across the board.
Okay, so it sounds like the holy grail of poverty alleviation. You design a simple $70 loan, you cure the survival paradox, the farmers generate a 28% return, and their kids stay in school. Case closed.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Time to roll this out globally to hundreds of millions of people, right? But here is where the researchers pulled a genuinely brilliant, deeply paranoid move in their experimental design.
They didn't just stop at individual impact.
No, they didn't just randomize who got the loan. They randomized the density of the loans across the landscape.
And this is where the narrative completely fractures. This is the phenomenon of general equilibrium, and it is the most crucial paradigm-shifting element of this entire study.
Okay, walk me through this.
The researchers structured a saturation design. Out of the 17 sublocations, which are essentially clusters of neighboring villages, they randomly assigned 9 of them to be high intensity and 8 to be low intensity.
So what does a high intensity versus low intensity cluster actually look like on the ground? Like, practically?
In the high intensity areas, 80% of all the One Acre Fund farmer groups were enrolled in the study, and a very large portion of those individuals were offered the loan.
Okay, so almost everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the low-intensity areas, only 40% of the groups were enrolled.
Right.
So you have a situation where in some village markets, just a small handful of lucky people get this magic financial shield.
Right.
But in other village markets down the road, practically everyone has the loan.
And this leads to our second massive reversal. We know the farmers in the low saturation areas, where only a few people got the loan, made fantastic profits. They executed the arbitrage perfectly and secured that 28% return.
Yes.
But what happened to the farmers in the high saturation areas where almost everyone got the loan?
In the high saturation areas, the individual profits for the borrowers completely vanished. Their financial gains shrank so dramatically that they became statistically indistinguishable from zero.
Wait, I need to process this. You're saying that the cure actually killed the profit? If we help everyone, nobody makes money?
That is exactly what happened.
I just want to make sure you, the listener, fully grasp the sheer irony of this. The cure worked perfectly when applied to a few people. But the moment you scale the cure to help everyone in the village, nobody makes any money. The intervention essentially killed its own profit margins.
It did.
Now, a cynic might assume the farmers in the high saturation areas just got lazy or spent the loan money on consumer goods instead of storing grain.
But the data explicitly rules that out. Their storage behavior was identical.
So they still locked it up.
The farmers in the high saturation villages held on to just as much grain for just as long as the farmers in the low saturation villages. What changed was not the behavior of the humans. What changed was the mathematics of the market itself.
Okay, let's trace the exact supply and demand curve here, because this is where the invisible mechanics of economics become incredibly tangible. Walk me through a village market in October, right after the harvest, under normal conditions.
Under normal conditions, in October, everyone is suffering from the liquidity crunch. Everyone needs cash for debts and upcoming school fees.
Right.
So almost every farmer brings their maize to the local market at the exact same time. The market is flooded with massive supply. Demand remains relatively flat. Therefore, the local price drops to the absolute floor.
That is the $10 winter coat baseline.
Exactly. But now let's look at our high saturation village. Almost everyone in this area has received the harvest time loan. They have the $70 in their pockets.
So nobody's panicking.
Nobody's panicking. Everyone takes their freshly harvested grain home, locks it in the shed, and slaps a zip tie on it. What happens to the physical supply of maize in that specific local market?
It vanishes. Suddenly there's almost no corn for sale.
Precisely. You have engineered a massive, localized supply shock. Because the majority of the community pulled their grain off the market simultaneously, the local price of maize in October didn't crash.
Wait, it didn't crash at all?
No. In fact, the researchers and numerators who were visiting these markets regularly to record prices found that the harvest time price in these high saturation areas actually went up by about 4% compared to the control areas.
Wow. The price floor was artificially raised because nobody was desperate to sell.
Yes.
Wow.
Now, fast forward 6 to 8 months. We are in the lean season. Normally, the village has run out of food, the market is completely empty, and the merchants jack the price up to the ceiling.
Right.
But this year, in the high saturation village, everyone has a shed full of perfectly preserved grain. And because the 9-month loan is coming due, everyone unlocks their shed at the exact same time to sell their stored grain and cash in on the high prices.
And they accidentally flood the market.
They flood the market during the lean season. The localized supply spikes massively, and therefore the lean season price crashes down.
So the low price in October got higher, and the high price in May got lower. The gap completely closed.
The researchers prove that by giving everyone access to credit, they allowed everyone to trade optimally. But in doing so, the massive seasonal price gap flattened out.
That is just, wow.
The arbitrage opportunity was destroyed by its own success. You cannot buy low and sell high if the prices are no longer low and high.
That feels like a devastating conclusion. It implies that solving poverty at scale is mathematically impossible because the market dynamics will always self-correct to eliminate the profit. If you are only looking at the profit statement of the individual who took the loan, the high saturation experiment looks like an absolute failure.
It does. But this is where we have to expand our view beyond the individual borrower, because the destruction of that profit margin actually triggered an invisible economic miracle for the most vulnerable people in the region.
Let's look at the control group in those high saturation areas. These are the people who did not get the loan. Maybe they didn't qualify, maybe they weren't part of One Acre Fund, or maybe they were just the poorest of the poor.
Right, the most vulnerable.
Their individual behavior didn't change at all. They still panic sold in October, and they still panic bought in May.
But the market they were trading in had fundamentally changed.
Because of the borrowers.
Yes,
Wow.
because their neighbors, the borrowers, had smoothed out the supply. The non-borrowers suddenly found themselves selling their October grain into a market with higher prices. And when they desperately needed to buy food in May, they were buying from a market with significantly lower prices.
I'm going to introduce the most mind-bending statistic in this entire paper. I love this part.
It's the best part.
The researchers ran incredibly complex welfare calculations to figure out where the actual economic value of this intervention went. In the high saturation areas, 69% of the total welfare generated by the loan went to the people who didn't even take the loan.
More than 2/3 of the massive economic benefit generated by this financial product bled completely out of the experiment and landed directly in the pockets of the neighbors.
That is incredible.
The poorest people in the village got the life-saving benefits of price stability completely for free. subsidized by the storage efforts of their neighbors.
It's like paying out of your own pocket to install a massive high-powered street lamp in front of your house to keep your own driveway safe from burglars, right?
Yeah, good analogy.
You pay the installation fee, you pay the electricity bill, but the light is so bright that suddenly the entire block is illuminated. Your neighbors get the exact same safety benefit without paying a dime.
That is the perfect analogy for what economists call a positive externality or spillover effect. The borrowers paid the 10% interest to One Acre Fund. They took on the physical risk of storing the grain, and in doing so, they inadvertently provided a massive public good to their entire community.
But here is the dark side of that street lamp analogy. If you are the company manufacturing and selling that street lamp, or in our real-world case, if you are a private profit-driven bank selling this agricultural loan, this scenario is an absolute disaster.
It is the textbook definition of a market failure. A private bank evaluates the success of a loan strictly by looking at the individual profit of their specific borrower.
Right.
If the borrower makes money, the bank can ensure the loan is repaid and perhaps charge higher interest rates in the future. But if the borrower's individual profit drops to zero because the market stabilized, even if the village as a whole is thriving, the bank views the financial product as a failure.
Because the bank cannot send a bill to the neighbors for the free light.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The researchers mathematically modeled this. They calculated that a private financial institution could only capture about 31% of the total economic value created by this harvest time loan.
Meaning they leave 69% on the table.
Right. They have no mechanism to monetize or tax the 69% of the welfare that bleeds out to the broader community. Therefore, no rational, profit-maximizing private bank will ever scale this loan to high saturation. It destroys their own clients' profit margins and limits their own returns.
So we are left with a terrifying reality. We have found a literal cure for a community-wide poverty trap, but the private market will never, ever supply it at scale. It is a financial dead knot.
And this revelation totally upends 20 years of conventional wisdom regarding microlending.
How so?
Well, for the last 2 decades, prominent economists have run randomized controlled trials on traditional microcredit, like giving a woman a loan to buy a sewing machine. And the results have often been deeply disappointing. They look at the borrower's ledger, see that her profits barely moved, and declare that microcredit doesn't cure poverty.
But they are completely missing the street lamp effect. They are looking at the wrong ledger.
Precisely. Imagine if 100 women in a village all get microloans and buy sewing machines. What happens? The local supply of tailoring services skyrockets.
Right, which drops the price.
Because supply goes up, the price of tailoring drops. The individual tailors don't get rich. Their individual profit statements look stagnant. But suddenly, every single person in that village, including the poorest families, can afford to buy decent, durable clothes for their children.
The overall welfare goes up.
Yes. The overall welfare of the village has drastically improved. But because the economists evaluating the program only looked at the individual borrower's profit margin, they completely missed the macro-level miracle and declared the intervention a failure.
Wow.
This Kenyan study is a massive wake-up call. It proves that ignoring general equilibrium effects leads us to massively underestimate the social good these financial tools can create.
Okay, so if the private banking sector refuses to fix this because they can't capture the profit, what is the alternative? Can a one-time charitable injection cure the disease permanently? Let's say a massive philanthropic organization, like the Gates Foundation, drops millions of dollars to provide these loans at high saturation for a year or two. Do the farmers use that boost to escape the trap forever?
The researchers were deeply curious about this exact question. They didn't just pack up and leave after 9 months. They returned to these exact same villages a year later, and even 2 years later in some sublocations, to conduct long-run follow-up surveys.
They wanted to see if a temporary intervention could permanently fix the plumbing.
Exactly.
And the data they found is, frankly, heartbreaking.
It is incredibly sobering. To understand why it failed in the long run, we have to look at the exact timing of the trap. During the first year of the experiment, they didn't just offer the loan in October. They randomly split the borrowers into 2 distinct timing groups.
Okay, what were the groups?
Half the groups were offered the loan in October, right at the moment of harvest. The other half were offered the exact same loan under the exact same terms, but it was dispersed in January, right before the school fees were due.
Which logically makes perfect sense. If the entire root cause of the panic selling is the January school fee, just give them the money in January. Problem solved.
You would absolutely think so. In fact, during the focus groups, many farmers explicitly requested the January timing. They knew their own psychology. They feared that if they got a lump sum of cash in October, they might be tempted to spend it on immediate consumer needs or relatives would demand it, leaving them short for school fees anyway.
Right. The kin tax again?
So waiting until January seemed like the safest bet. But the data revealed a brutal truth. The January loan did almost nothing. It completely failed to change their storage behavior.
Wait, nothing. Why would a January loan fail to stop the October panic selling?
Because the liquidity gap, the immediate desperation for cash forms the exact second the crop is pulled from the soil in October.
Oh, because they owe other people.
Yes. These households are living so incredibly close to the edge of survival that they cannot simply hold their breath for 3 months. They have daily expenses. They have debts to local shopkeepers that come due at harvest. If a child gets malaria in November, they need cash that day.
They can't pay a November medical bill with a promised January loan.
Exactly. They cannot point to a promised loan in January to pay a medical bill today. If they do not have cash in hand, the very day the maize is harvested, the maize gets liquidated, the trap snapped shut instantly.
So the timing has to be surgically precise. Okay, but what about the farmers who did get the October loan? The ones who made that incredible 28% profit in the first year. Did they take those profits, put them in a savings account, and save their way out of the cycle for the following year?
The follow-up data showed that the vast majority of them reverted right back to baseline panic selling the very next year. The moment the One Acre Fund loan program concluded, they went right back to selling low in October and buying high in May.
I can hear listeners getting cynical right now. This is the exact moment where critics of welfare or development aid throw their hands up. They will say, we gave them a head start. We gave them a 28% return. Why didn't they just reinvest the profits? Why not pull themselves up by their bootstraps now that they have a buffer?
It is a very common, very human reaction. It feels frustrating. But that frustration ignores the brutal, unforgiving mathematics of extreme poverty. Let's actually break down the illusion of the bootstraps.
Yes, let's do the math live. What would it actually take for a Kenyan farmer to self-finance this arbitrage?
To completely self-finance this trade, meaning they build up enough savings to pay the January school fees without needing to sell their maize or take an NGO loan, a farmer would need to take 100% of the $18 profit from that first year, put it in a locked box, and absolutely never touch it.
Okay.
And they would have to repeat that perfection for 3 to 6 consecutive years. And that mathematical model assumes 0 emergencies. No sick children, no broken tools, no droughts, no funerals.
Which is completely impossible in reality. Life happens.
Completely impossible.
Okay.
Furthermore, humans do not save 100% of their windfalls. When a deeply impoverished family suddenly has an extra $18, they don't lock it in a vault. They buy protein-rich food for their malnourished children. They patch the leaking roof. They buy a slightly better pair of shoes. If you assume a normal, optimistic human savings rate of 10%, which, by the way, is exactly what a responsible, highly disciplined financial advisor in the United States would tell a middle-class client to save. How long would it take the Kenyan farmer to save their way out of this credit constraint?
If they save 10% of their profits every year with 0 emergencies, how long?
34 years.
34 years. That is an entire lifetime of labor.
Poverty is not a lack of seed capital. It is not a lack of moral character or a lack of entrepreneurial spirit or a failure to understand the concept of saving. It is a structural straitjacket.
Wow.
When the margins of survival are that extraordinarily thin, one exceptionally good year of 28% returns does not magically build a ladder out of the pit. It just makes the bottom of the pit slightly more comfortable for a few passing months.
So a one-time charitable intervention doesn't permanently fix it. The private banking market fundamentally won't fund it because the profits bleed out to the neighbors. Where does that leave us? Are these rural markets just doomed to this cycle forever?
It leaves us looking for systemic, macro-level solutions. Because it is vital to understand that this is not just a story about Kenyan farmers in the 21st century. It is a story about the fundamental architecture of human economies throughout history.
Let's pan out and look at the historical context here, because as you mentioned in your notes, this cycle of fragmented, isolated markets causing extreme seasonal price volatility and trapping peasant classes in perpetual debt, this is a very old ghost.
It is deeply embedded in human history. If you examine the economic records of England between the 14th and 17th centuries, you see the exact same phenomenon.
Really?
The historical price data for wheat and barley in medieval and early modern England shows massive, violent seasonal price swings. They experienced the exact same survival paradox.
No way.
Yes. English peasants were routinely forced to sell their grain low at the autumn harvest just to pay taxes and debts, only to face starvation or exorbitant prices in the spring.
Wait, really? Medieval England was experiencing the same 40 to 50% seasonal price jumps that we are seeing in modern-day Kenya.
Absolutely. The volatility was devastating. And it is crucial to ask, how did England eventually fix it? Did someone suddenly invent a magical, rat-proof medieval barn? Did a nobleman ride through the villages, teaching the peasants better financial literacy?
Let me guess. No, technology and lectures didn't save them.
No. The violent seasonal volatility in England was only smoothed out over centuries when macro-level interest rates permanently dropped, and a functioning, accessible, nationwide financial system was painstakingly built.
Ah, the system.
When capital became cheap and accessible to the broader market, merchants, traders, and eventually farmers could cheaply borrow money to store grain at scale. That widespread storage smoothed out the seasonal supply, the prices permanently stabilized, and the routine seasonal famines effectively ended. It wasn't an agricultural revolution that fixed the price swings, it was a financial revolution.
It is the plumbing. It is the invisible pipes under the floorboards of society that dictate who survives and who starves. And I just want to pause and marvel at the profound absurdity of the modern world for a second. We are living in an era of unprecedented technological miracles. We have artificial intelligence writing poetry. We have digital cryptocurrencies moving billions of dollars across the globe in milliseconds. We have billionaires launching sports cars into orbit just for fun.
You do.
Yet right now, hundreds of millions of human beings are still trapped in a medieval financial loop. They are forced to sell low and buy high just to keep their kids in school, simply because the basic financial plumbing in their geographic area is broken.
It highlights a massive recurring blind spot in how the developed world approaches global poverty. We are absolutely obsessed with technological fixes. We love the idea of donating money to engineers to build better solar-powered silos or funding geneticists to engineer drought-resistant, high-yield seeds.
And to be clear, those things are incredibly valuable.
Of course they are. But the core lesson of this research is that better physical technology will not save these farmers if the financial plumbing remains broken. If you helicopter in and give a Kenyan farmer a state-of-the-art, titanium-reinforced, climate-controlled silo, that farmer will still sell their maize at rock-bottom prices in October if they do not have a financial mechanism to pay January school fees.
The diagnostic X-ray is broken, but once you look closely at the data, the disease is painfully clear. It is a severe structural lack of accessible credit.
And solving that disease requires building robust institutions. It requires a paradigm shift in how we view lending. We have to recognize that some interventions like providing extremely cheap, highly accessible credit to rural farmers might look like a loss or a failure on a private bank's ledger, but they are a massive transformative win on society's ledger. Because of the general equilibrium effects, because of that 69% spillover of welfare to the poorest neighbors, it might be that the only way to fund these street lamps is through public infrastructure. It might require highly subsidized public-private partnerships or government-backed agricultural banks that do not expect to extract 100% of the value they create.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started in the harvest fields of rural Kenya. We dug into the complex macroeconomic mathematics of general equilibrium. We exposed the blind spots of traditional microfinance. And we traced the echoes of this exact same crisis back to the peasants of 14th century England.
And I think the vital through line connecting all of this is that human behavior is remarkably, persistently rational, even when it looks utterly absurd from the outside. When you see people making terrible choices, you just have to look harder to find the invisible constraints they are operating under.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought that I want to leave with you, the listener. Let this mull in your brain for a bit. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about rural farmers in East Africa being forced into devastating financial trades by immediate liquidity constraints.
The survival paradox. The inability to bridge the gap between having assets and needing cash.
Exactly. But I want you to turn that lens around and look at the modern economy right here, right now. Look at the explosion of the gig economy. Look at the millions of paycheck-to-paycheck workers in the wealthiest nations on Earth.
The parallels are significantly closer. and significantly more uncomfortable than we might like to admit.
Think about an Uber driver or an Amazon warehouse worker whose car transmission suddenly blows out on a Tuesday. They desperately need that car to get to work on Wednesday, but their bank account is empty. So they drive to a brightly lit strip mall and take out a payday loan at a 400% annualized interest rate just to get the car out of the shop.
They are absorbing a massive, mathematically devastating financial penalty just to bridge a timing mismatch between when they need cash today and when their next paycheck arrives on Friday.
Aren't they also being forced by their environment to sell low and buy high? Are they really making a fundamentally different economic choice than the Kenyan farmer selling their maize in October? Are we really that far removed from the harvest cycles of rural Kenya, or are we all just trading different kinds of grain, trapped in our own localized markets, just trying to survive our own versions of the January bills?
It raises a profound and unsettling question about the invisible guns pointed at vulnerable people everywhere. It forces us to ask whether our modern financial systems are truly built to disarm those constraints, or if the system itself is just waiting to pull the trigger.
That is all for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us as we explored the sources, unpacked the data, and hopefully gave you a radically new perspective on how markets actually function on the ground. Until next time, keep looking for the invisible constraints. See you later.